Thank you very much. I was going to say, if people wanted to move further forward, because I know sometimes the screen's hard to see from the back, and I'm using some objects in the slides which you might find interesting to have a look at. So thank you all for coming this afternoon. It's been a long sessions of talking for the last few days, so I appreciate you coming, and it's been quite exciting because as I've been putting this presentation together, I've been adding things during the conference because I've been learning lots about what people are doing, but also being challenged by ideas as well. So this is a very up-to-date presentation, basically finished this morning. So thanks again. My name's Elizabeth TRIARICO, and as Angela said in the previous session, my first name Elizabeth is actually Elisabetta. But growing up in Australia, you quickly learn that you need to change your name in some way to sort of fit in. So we were talking about words and meanings being very important from our very first session on the opening. So I think that's an important point to make too, about people's names and how those change over time. My role here at Co.As.It is manager of the Italian Historical Society and also the collections of the Museo Italiano. And I'll be talking more about the Museo as I go through the talk and just explain a bit more about the role of the Museo. Just as an overview of what I will be talking about, it's basically the importance of objects and stories in the story of migration and settlement. And I add that word settlement because it's not just the moving to another country, but it's actually the settling and that impact that it has on people and families as well. And also the importance that the objects have for these people in their journeys. Also, I'd be looking at the fact that this idea of migration is not just something unique to the to the Italian migration experience. It actually happens to a lot of communities. And as part of my work as the manager of the collections here, on a daily basis I need to make a decision about why we're collecting things and the connection to the Italian experience. And thirdly, I'll be using the Italian Historical Society as an example of this, as practical, tangible examples of how objects and stories tell a lot more than you think. Just firstly, I can't talk about the Italian Historical Society without talking about Co.As.It. We are here because of Co.As.It, and the link with Co.As.It is what makes us unique. It is that incredible connection to the Italian community that other historical societies and collections don't have, and that's made a huge difference to the way we work. Also, the fact that it's the early collecting actually resulted from going out into the Italian community, age community, to collect the stories. As it happens, Co.As.It is actually celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, which is very exciting for us. And it was established to provide a range of social welfare services in response to the needs of the Italian migrant settlers in Australia. The first trained social worker was employed in 1968, along with many volunteers. From these humble beginnings, the organisation has grown considerably and now includes two major departments: aged care and disability services, Italian language, culture and heritage. And within those departments, you'll see that there are other subsections that work with the community. The Italian Historical Society actually falls under the Italian Language, Culture and Heritage Department, but a lot of what we do crosses over to the aged care and disability services areas as well. The Italian Historical Society was established, actually, what I might do is just go back to that image there. That image is actually very, very important. That image was taken in 1980, and it's the signing of the agreement between Co.As.It and the Ministry of Education for the teaching of Italian language in state schools. So this happened in 1980. It was groundbreaking at the time. And so this is a record of that. Part of our collecting includes corporate collecting, the history of Co.As.It. And pictured from the left is Umberto Martinengo, Bill Hannon, the General Manager of Schools Program Division of the Ministry of Education at the time, Giancarlo Martini Piovano, some of you who may have met him, who was the director at the time, now CEO, and Diaspore Italiane, then Vice President of Co.As.It. I just thought it would be a good idea to talk about what Co.As.It does, because I'm not sure if people actually knew that before they came here. The Italian Historical Society itself was established in 1980 under the presidency of Sir James Goble. This was an innovative and groundbreaking decision. The Society remains the first and only cultural organisation of its kind in Australia. The Society's aim continues to be to work closely with the Italian community to collect, document, preserve and promote the Italian-Australian migration story through oral histories and associated artefacts, which has ensured this important history has an authentic and united voice. The role of Co.As.It as a non-profit welfare and cultural agency for Italian Australians of Italian descent continues to ensure the Society's work and the Society itself is uniquely placed to work closely with and represent the Italian community in sharing the many and varied experiences of Italian-Australian migration. Thanks to the generous ongoing support of Co.As.It and countless donors and lenders, without these people we wouldn't be here today, from the Italian community, the Society's collection has grown to include almost 400 oral histories. Now that sounds a lot, but when you consider how many people have actually come to Australia, it's just the tip of the iceberg really. Over 8,800 images, which you can actually search online, and a wide range of objects which reflect the Italian migration and settlement story in Australia. The collection itself is significant for a number of reasons. The objects and stories are unique and powerful, and in many cases they provide personal links to specific regions and towns in Italy, which is very important for some migrants. They have assisted migrants in coping with the trauma of leaving their homeland and family and the uncertainty of arriving in a new land. And they also act, even today, as a catalyst for community engagement by bringing together the community to share common experiences and feelings. And when I say powerful, I think you can see from these images, we have the first one, which is actually people arriving to Australia on board ship in anticipation of what they're going to find here. And the image next to it is actually a reunion, mother and son, showing you the trauma that must have been felt because it's still expressed when they meet. I'm just showing a small, very, very small selection of what we have in the collection. Most of our material is actually on display in the Museo Italiano permanent exhibition, along with a lot of loan material. Here we have an image, a postcard that was created by Vincenzo Candela when he was still in Viggiano in Italy. He came out here with his family and had a tailoring business as well as a photographic business. And his son Angelo is a well-known musician. This is just one piece within the collection. We've got thousands of documents and photographs and even a very small diary kept by Vincenzo's second wife, which includes, as Laura Mecca discovered, an entry about his death. She sat there and noted his death as he was passing away in hospital. So a little book like that you would normally think wouldn't be important until you open the pages and actually read it. We have had some people talking about the Santo Spirito collection right at the beginning of the conference. They mentioned Anthony Santo Spirito. His mother Elena Santo Spirito is very well known in the Italian community in Australia and helped many Italians when they arrived looking for support. This letter that you see here, what's interesting in it is the fact that it was addressed simply to La Mamma degli Italiani, and the address was Australia. That was it. But it found its way to her home, so they must have known where she was. We also have personal stories, as with the Durbano diary from the Second World War. That's an interesting object because it actually was taken from overseas, brought to Australia. We have it in our collection, and Laura has actually been in contact with the family, and we've been able to make a copy of the diary to give back to the family in Italy. So it's a form of repatriation, and they've generously allowed us to keep the original, which is very exciting for us. But this is the other connection we have with the community. It's not about taking the material, it's about working with the community and respecting the community and giving back as well. And then we've got our little carretto there. Now, it's quite small there, but it's actually quite large. So we can have very large items in the collection. But that in itself, for Sicilian people, speaks volumes. There's stories within stories in that carretto. So one object can tell many stories for people too. One of our largest collections is our oral history collection. As I mentioned, it covers about 400 personal stories. Most of these were recorded in the late 1980s as part of a major exhibition that was being created, and they were recorded on cassette tapes. We're in the process of transferring those to digital to make them more accessible. There are rare interviews relating to very early migration, and they are very rare primary source material. When dealing with these oral histories, I believe that we need to keep in mind that these are people's personal recollections of events. There's multiple stories we're looking at, views and voices. They're not necessarily just dates and facts. And one of the important things is keeping this in mind when translating this material and making it available, because we're using the voices of other people when we're doing this. It's not our voice necessarily. We need to respect that and interpret it in a way that's faithful to the original intent. We have hard copy transcript, hard copies being converted to digital as well, which is very important because when you're looking at 20 pages of typed notes that were done in the 80s, which means there's no computer version of them, this is going to make them so much more accessible for research purposes. There's also an interesting aspect in dealing with multicultural collections like this, is that we're dealing with multiple languages. We're dealing with English, Italian, regional dialects. And also there's a level of language as well. Some people may have not had a certain level of schooling, so their terminology may be different. So trying to interpret that and understand it. And it's not about just putting that out to the public, it's actually interpreting what they're trying to say. So there's the issue about multiple translations and risks of spelling and spelling errors when you're actually looking at translating this material into different versions. There was a lot of time spent in gathering authorisations for people to make sure that this could be used properly, but not all are covered. And so this poses problems for us currently when we're looking at privacy and other issues. And also there's a possibility of misinterpretation. The next level we're looking at is digital stories, which is a totally different way of doing oral history. It's not about sitting down for 4 hours and taking the full story. So we have another level of responsibility that when we're taking a snapshot of people's histories, we're actually doing them justice as well as providing a valuable story for people to know. The question I pose is, what about the missing stories? Because there's been a big gap between the early 80s, when we're talking about 1920s, 30s migration, even 50s migration. We need to be filling the gap with the new migrations that are coming and using that as contemporary history while it's still happening rather than necessarily reflect on it. It's not moving.
There he is.
Where are we now?
It's not moving apparently, Peter.
You want this one?
Yeah, the other one's not working. Yeah, thank you. Thanks. Some of the recent significant donations we've had to the collection, which means it's still very active and we still have people donating to us, has been the Dr. Gianfranco Cresciani's oral history collection of oral histories to do with fascism and anti-fascism in Australia. It's a very unique collection, and what we've done is actually make copies of these audio tapes onto digital so that we can use them, but also we give that back to Dr. Cresciani as well to continue his research. We also were lucky to have Dr. Giorgio Santoro's collection, and last year we received a donation of 600 items from the Italian club Cavour, which is the oldest social club, not regional, but social club in Australia. It was celebrating its centenary last year. So it was quite exciting for everyone around. What's interesting is the image that you see here is the inaugural meeting. It was called the Cadorna Club when it first met. And this is the original meeting in 1917 and at the Athenaeum Club in the city. I was contacted a few weeks ago from the club because they're having their centenary and they wanted to use this image for their history because they don't have this image. So it's sharing within cultural institutions as well. The exhibition launch was quite exciting and also included a formal handover of the collection by Co.As.It President Ms. Rhonda Barrow, which was a very, I think, important thing to do for the donor as well as ourselves, to formalise it and celebrate the donation. Sometimes donations happen, things are dropped on a table, quickly someone fills up some forms and they're gone. So this was such a significant thing that it was important to do that. But also we're working very closely with the members of the club to fill in the gaps as well, because with the images that we have, we don't really know a lot of the story. We have lots of photos of people, but unless you know the people, what's the story? So that's the other important thing. It's not about just collecting images, it's about the stories behind the images and who is in the image. Now, with accessing the collection, we are very much encouraging people to use our website. We have our photographs online, we have copies of our journal online for research, also fact sheets, educational tools. We're doing this because this is the most accessible way of accessing the collection. Also, a lot of the collection still needs to be catalogued, and you'll see from the website we've got something like 30 themes that we're dealing with, 30 separate collections that we need to catalogue. And so access by coming in and looking at original material that's uncatalogued is quite problematic. So at the moment we're working out new systems to make the material more available, and we're using these sorts of tools to do that. Now, just going back in time, but noting that the Historical Society and Co.As.It were involved in some very groundbreaking exhibitions. The first was Victoria's Italians, which is the exhibition that started the collection. It was the first ethnic community curated exhibition to be displayed in an Australian mainstream institution. It was launched at the State Library of Victoria. And you can see here the person in the middle is actually Race Matthews, who was the Minister of the Arts at the time, Sir James Gobbo, and the consul was also there for the opening. The invitation specifies that it was a joint opening between the State Library and Co.As.It, which is very, very exciting. Little words, but big importance. The catalogue itself is a great document. It tells us what was on display, because we tend to forget with exhibitions that are temporary that you lose that information. And with that you can see the wealth of objects that was in that display. We had Australia's Italians, and this was the first national and international touring exhibition. Victoria's Italians actually toured all around Victoria, and because of that we were actually able to go into the communities and gather information rather than waiting for information to come to us. And that was very much a proactive exercise. With the Australia's Italians, the exciting thing about that is it was part of an Australian event. It was the bicentennial. We considered important because we were part of that history, Australia's history. The interesting thing is that the Italian version of this exhibition is still touring Italy today after all these years, which is it's quite amazing. I don't think it's coming back from the sounds of it. I think that people are still wanting it to be there, so it's quite exciting. We're very keen though to update it, because I think some of the information needs updating. But it's quite exciting, I haven't heard anything like that before. And collecting and display within the community has been really important for this. As you can see, with this we had the opening with the President of Italy, Francesco Cossiga, at the time. It was opened in Canberra, so that was a major achievement in itself, and you can see from the photograph the number of people who were there. The poster that you see was the proactive collecting. In that poster we were asking people for their objects to use in the exhibition, so it was very much again proactive collecting. The third groundbreaking exhibition was Bridging Two Worlds, the Jews, Italians and Carlton. This again was held at a major institution, Melbourne Museum. What was special about this exhibition was that it was the first joint community exhibition that has been held in Victoria, if not Australia. It was created in partnership with Co.As.It, the Italian Historical Society, the Jewish Museum of Australia and Museum Victoria. It's not me, it's not. You try to think it doesn't work.
Which one?
This one. No, for some reason it's not. Yes. Sorry. So it's back. Oops. Yeah, this one here. Is it just freezing? Okay. No, thank you for that, Peter. Sorry. Now, the last groundbreaking permanent or groundbreaking exhibition is the Museo Italiano. It's the first permanent exhibition for Co.As.It and the Italian Historical Society. It's an interesting thing because I know that a lot of people refer to the Museo as the museum. In actual fact, the Historical Society is the museum. When you look at the ICOM definition of a museum, it's an institution that collects, preserves, interprets. And that's what the Historical Society does. But because we have the title Museo, I think it's caused a little bit of confusion. But that's a very important part of what we do because that is the face of the Historical Society. And again, that was a major achievement in 2010 because it brought together the community, and we have a lot of material, if you haven't seen it already, on display that's on loan from the community. Without, again, I keep stressing the Italian community, without their help, we could not tell the story, and they've been so incredibly generous. We also publish, and these are just some of the publications we have. The last major one was Per l'Australia, and it's the story of Italian migration through objects, stories and photographs. And we have the Italian Historical Society journal that we publish, which is a great research tool. Most of you, I think, probably use the collection quite a bit because I know through the phone calls I have for requests for images and information from the journals, I think most of you may already know about it. Now, I find these images are really, really important. This is the community and government support. This is the opening of the Museo in 2010, and you can see the volume of people that came to this opening. The whole of the street behind you was closed off, with people queuing to get into the Museo. It was amazing. And the key thing too is that we got the state support, which was hugely important. And we were recognised as the representative of the precinct. This was precinct funding. We were saying we're part of the Carlton community. So the government saw our work as incredibly valuable in interpreting the history of the area. And I like the little boy in the middle because it shows you it's all ages who are interested, having the Italian flag painted on his face. The exciting thing is the Italian Historical Society also, after all these years, is incredibly relevant. Not only do we provide researchers like yourself with the material, the primary source material that you need for the work that you do, but also we've been able to feature in many exhibitions, and as Loredana was talking about the Beyond Borders exhibition last year, we were able to be part of that, which is very exciting. Also the Granger Museum. It was a museum it's a museum in Melbourne University, and it's related to Percy Granger and music history, and I'll show you a bit of an image of that in a moment. The Immigration Museum through the Madame Cellini collection, which we donated to the museum. We also worked with the Italiane Society and with a presentation of the slides in our collection from the 19th century. Lantern slides were coloured. We also have been providing through Laura Mecca online articles for SBS. We're featured now at the moment on an online exhibition which is being funded by the Wellcome Trust, and we are one of about 8 institutions, and we're the only non-mainstream collection there. We're the only historical society. Every other collection actually belongs to major institutions like the Museum of Victoria. We're currently featuring in global articles that we're creating and working jointly to promote the collection through the global newspaper, and I think you've probably heard about that. And also just recently, the Madame Serini collection seems very popular because again it's been featured just recently at the Melbourne Museum for their Inside Out exhibition. This is the Percy Granger Museum display, and our photographs featured as part of the interpretation of musical history through the Cheddar photograph collection mainly, and also featured in their catalogue. So again, going out and becoming part of the mainstream, not just staying within our own community, but being relevant to the broader story, which is the thing that's going to save us. The more insular you are, the less support you get, you become invisible. So these tiny little things are actually huge for everyone. We keep promoting ourselves as we go. That's the Wellcome Trust online exhibition above. The Madame Serini gowns you'll see at the museum are quite stunning. Part of our challenge here is we're an historical society with not much storage. So these gowns are absolutely vital and important, and we realised that we weren't the right institution to hold those. So we've worked with the Melbourne Museum and the Immigration Museum to have them stored and interpreted with them, but telling our story as well. This is the second article I've put together for the Global. It's a feature. It's wonderful to get the exposure through the Global, but I can tell you that this one page took me 2.5 days to prepare. It doesn't look like much, but I had to select 7 images representing important women for International Women's Day out of hundreds of photographs and stories. And I wanted to create a mixture, not over famous people like Carla Zampati, but women working in factories, and we were talking just recently about that hidden heritage, to bring that out at the same level as Carla Zampati. There's also an image of the front of a shop at the top, and that's wanting to represent Mrs. Rinaldi. She had 9 children while assisting her husband run the restaurant. So it's also always, with women, it's the issue about the duality of the family as well as the business. So it's a double role that they're having at the same time. So, and we also have amongst our collection a famous Italian woman who was one of the people responsible for creating Glad Wrap, believe it or not. So, and as I said, putting that together and trying to synthesise the importance of women in Australia who happen to be Italian into 1 or 2 paragraphs is not the easiest thing to do. And the Globe has been amazing in helping us translate that so that the community can benefit from it as well. Now, just to talk generally about general aspects about the collection, I'll be quick, okay, is Artist Therapy by Alain de Botton. He's explained that art is used as therapy, and so are objects. The first image you see is from our departures gallery. These are items that people chose to take with them so they could be supported while they were away, important things to them personally. Below you'll see Mi Viene in Mente Quando, which is a newly released reminiscence program based on items from the Italian Historical Society collection run by Melbourne Museum. So it's going out into the community helping the aged. This is a question I'm posing to people here. It's about what we choose that's important. We've got iconic symbols of migration in front of you. Suitcases, trunks, bags, backpacks. Which one do we choose out of all of these? Which one's important? It's the one with the documented Italian association. It's the one that tells us where it came from, who the person was. It's the story that comes with it. It's Angelo's trunk. On top of that, there's an image of his grandchildren standing in the trunk. And that hole that you find on the top is actually from his use of the trunk when, after he arrived, as his ironing board. So he managed to burn a hole through the top of it. So again, it's the stories. Significance on many levels. We have a pupo siciliano in their collection. It's of local, regional and international significance because it's now been recognised as part of the intangible cultural heritage by UNESCO, as part of the Opera dei Pupi Siciliani. So this I discovered when I was working with Loredana. I was doing some research on our pupo and discovered this significance. It's also of great importance to people outside the Italian community who are interested in performing arts. Challenging aspects of collecting. How do we collect things that we can't bring into the building or put on the computer? This is an amazing artwork that's at the Eureka Tower in the city. I suggest you have a look at it. It was commissioned by the Grollo Roxen Foundation to commemorate Italian immigration and all migrants in Australia. It was unveiled on the 6th of December 2008 by Sir James Gobble. And what I find interesting is the description of Sir James. Former Governor of Victoria who came from a migrant family. It says so much. It says opportunity and it links back to migration. And this, just to tell you very quickly, the image is a man who's just about to meet his wife after many, many years being separated. The two children in front are moving towards their father. One of the children sort of recognises who he could be, not quite sure. The child behind her is petrified because the child has never seen his parent. And there's angst between the parents because they haven't seen each other. It says so much in that one artwork, and it's important to our story. If you look outside the building, you see the mural of the lady looking out to sea. Again, another very important public artwork. So it's about being part of the mainstream, I've mentioned that already, and the other key project we're very excited about is actually working in the future with the Galata Museo del Mare e delle Immersioni di Genova to assist with the development of their Australian gallery. So we've got quite a few challenges to meet, but we're doing that by introducing policies and procedures, looking at proactive collecting again, contemporary collecting, looking at the missing history, children of migrants. I'm one of those. I don't see my history there. They're living in two worlds. Are you Australian? Are you Italian? When you go overseas, who are you? There's lots of questions to ask. I don't see my history in there yet. Hopefully that'll change. There's new ways of collecting, like storage, and we need to cover all the topics we've talked about in this conference. We need to cover as well. We need to review the Museo Italiano, and we also need to create new and dynamic relationships also with the Italian cultural organisations as well as the Australian. Just food for thought as we're ending. That's an image of Lygon Street, so I thought I'd tie it in with the food aspect of it because everybody talks about food when they talk about the migrant experience, whether we want to or not. That's the Lygon Street Festa. We need to remember that we're dealing with and managing multiple and sometimes competing voices, views, stories and interpretations. And there's a power in the objects and stories in telling the Italian migration and settlement story, and this relies on the way they're interpreted. The important questions we need to ask are whose interpretation is it? In what context? For what purpose? And I'd like to link this in with the dinner for the presenters that we had last night. We had an impromptu history by Alan Winningham about his stories about being in Carlton in the 50s. And I found myself feeling strange feelings. I was thinking, who is this person standing up and talking about my history? I actually grew up here. This is my history too. And I was looking at him and I was thinking, he's representing the history that I remember growing up with, the only history. And also, I have to say this because I think it impacted on a number of us at this dinner, the word wog. For people who are from overseas, you may or may not have heard this word used. This word has many meanings, and for a lot of us it's actually still very hurtful. because it was never used when we were growing up as a positive, always a negative. And to hear someone use it who's not from your background, because we've tried to reinterpret it ourselves, is very, thank you. I feel frightened to say it.
Thank you.
Because it's the thing about, we talk about using words, but it's who uses them as well. So, sorry.
Mainstream Italian.
Okay, we can read. We can read it.
Yeah. The reason why I'm feeling like this is because what I felt was not my pain, just but my parents' pain. Because that's what it means to be a second generation. Because when you were growing up, you could hear the insults and understand them. Your parents sometimes didn't. So you actually heard for 2 generations, not just your own. So I just want to say
You're
that.
speaking for us. We were talking about this in the courtyard just 10 minutes ago, because there are traumatic histories which get re-signified as though they never existed in those throwaway lines of Wagatek.
That's right.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you. I'll just quickly, with the acknowledgements, I really do want to say that we are privileged that the donors and lenders give us this opportunity to tell their story, because they trust us. So we have to look after their heritage. So sometimes I say to all of you who come to me to ask for material, when I ask you for more information, or when I ask you to fill in forms, the reason is that we're trying to protect the original people's intention and also respecting your needs as well. So it's trying to balance that. And I just want to acknowledge 2 people in the audience today who are pioneers in setting up the Historical Society, Maria Tinche and Laura Mika at the back. So thank you.